Hi, I'm Heather Darch, and this is a presentation by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. Many small villages across Quebec's Châteauguay Valley have struggled to remain sustainable over time. In this series called Raising Spirits, we are looking for this precious heritage. Studies have shown that population decline in 19th century rural communities was often due to challenging economic factors that drove people away and led to a loss of community self-sufficiency. The reduction of local services and businesses hindered a village's survival. In some of these villages, however, there is still to this day a vitality of memory, where people can recall the names of their ancestors, where care is given to heritage graveyards, and where beloved institutions and cultural spaces are protected. In these historic communities, where efforts are made to preserve the community's legacy, the challenges that come with change and progress can be met head-on. This is Riverfield.
When the first settlers came, the north side of the river, there was actual land. Here, this was all swamp. And so when they got to the Scotch concession, it goes up on a ridge. They settled up on the ridge first because that was the best land, because it was high and dry. And back in those days, there's quite often forest fires went through, but because all this land lay underwater, the fire never got to the ground because it was so wet. And so once they started to drain it, they were surprised at how fertile the land was underneath. And hence you get roads like Fertile Creek, because they didn't know how good the land was.
My name is Scott Templeton. We're here in Riverfield, Quebec, on the banks of the English River. And Riverfield is in the parish of Tres-Saint-Sacrement. The nearest village is Hawick. And we're in the Châteauguay Valley, which is what we like to call it. It's often referred to as Montérégie West, but we call it the Châteauguay Valley. Riverfield's just a tiny hamlet of four corners. Being honest, Riverfield hasn't really grown since I've been born and raised here. There used to be a general store, a monument factory. There used to be a schoolhouse in the corner of the cemetery. Those are not operating anymore. The grocery store is now a private home. The foundry is no longer in operation, and the schoolhouse has been moved and became a personal home down and across the English River many years ago. The early settlers were mostly Scottish. A lot of families, a lot of Templetons, Carmichaels, McKells, Craigs, Roys, Orrs, Robertsons, Langs. My story is my family came here in 1829. They came on a boat. My great-great-great-grandfather, Robert Templeton, with his wife, Margaret Dickey, their 6 children. The 4 oldest children all got married. The oldest one was James. He married a Carmichael. And then the 3 sisters married James McKell, James Craig, and James Carmichael. So it's a bit tricky to go through the family tree because the men were mostly named Robert, James, William, or John. And the tradition back in the day was that the oldest son was named after the father's father. The oldest daughter was named after the mother's mother. The second oldest was named after the mother's father, and the second oldest daughter was named after the father's mother. So a lot of common names throughout the history. So I'm the 6th generation here, born and raised in Riverfield, and the 4 oldest ones got married. Unfortunately, the 5th one that came on the boat, he died of smallpox at age 29, and the youngest one arrived when he was 5 years old. He grew up, he got married in 1847 to Jane Knox. Unfortunately, she passed away in November of that year, and John himself was killed in a threshing mill accident in the spring of 1848. So they definitely endured a lot of hardship. And I gotta say, from my perspective, very grateful and appreciative and admire their perseverance through the generations. And that's what makes Riverfield what it is today. My family came from a little town called Dalry, Scotland, which is in the county of Ayrshire. It's about an hour southwest of Glasgow. And I think they came here for a better life. Times were tough over there, and there was a chance to go to the new world and start a new life with your family. So they came and they cleared land and built houses, and I guess the primary occupation was agriculture and survival. Back in those days, of course, people didn't travel very far to find a partner. So a lot of family, all the local Scottish families were interconnected sometimes, but they had a lot of social activities, and one of their favorite pastimes was curling, because Scottish people, that's where curling originated, and that was one of their favorite pastimes. But they had lots of social gathering, get-togethers, suppers, parties, all on horse and sleigh or horse and buggy.
As far as I know, there was worship service initially in the schoolhouse, which was closer to where we are now. It was closer to the cemetery. From about 1828 onwards, they did not have a fixed minister. I think they had a lot of itinerant ministers. In the 1840s, this congregation was one of the free church congregations that split from the main Presbyterian Church. Then there was, in the 1840s to about 1860, mid-1860s, there was a wooden church, I think slightly south of here on a different lot. And then after the churches recombined, when the schism was healed within the Presbyterian Church in 1869, the first cornerstone was laid for the stone church to the right. And so that was completed in 1871. And the section at the back was completed in, I believe, 1922. My name is Alyson Champ. I'm not from here originally. I grew up closer to Howick, which is a little bit north of here. My connection to Riverfield is through my husband's family. My husband, Andrew Carmichael's family, came here in approximately 1825. The family came from Lanarkshire originally, I believe, and came here to farm. They've had a connection to this place since then, although in the 1920s, Andrew's grandfather Raymond did leave and go to Montreal to start a business, which is now Carmichael Engineering. But they've always maintained a connection to this area, had a cottage here in fact, and retained the family home. So it was used as a rental property, but it has always been part of the family patrimony. In the 1970s, my husband's family started to use the family home as their summer residence, and then in the 1990s, my father-in-law moved out here permanently. So since the early 1990s, the Carmichaels have been formally in residence once again in Riverfield. I think the congregation in Riverfield suffered from what a lot of rural churches suffered from. There was out-migration, especially among Anglophones in Quebec, so people did leave. And, farms were consolidated and became much larger, so there were fewer people here. Also, less church going in general. All the Catholic churches here are also vacant and frequently repurposed, so Riverfield is not unique in that. By about the 2000s, I think the congregation had dwindled to a very small number of elderly congregants, and it was difficult for them to maintain the building because it was an old building that needs repairs, and it was difficult to do them. So in 2018, my late father-in-law, Miller Carmichael, who was at that point living in the family home across from the church, and whose family was affiliated with this church from the beginning, began talks with the congregation and also with the Presbyterian Montreal to buy the church. And in 2021, the Carmichael family formed a charitable foundation called the Riverfield Presbyterian Church Foundation, Inc., which administers the church building. And my father-in-law, with Carmichael Engineering, initiated a large program of renovations that are ongoing after the deed of the church was passed over, and I think it was in 2022. It became legally the property of the charitable foundation. It has been going on since late 2022 when the building was completely gutted and has been heavily restored, and we are hoping that it's going to last for at least another 156 years. I'm happy to be part of this project to revitalize this church, which is beautiful. It's a very peaceful place. It's a beautiful place.
It's a great source for ancestral information. I mean, being here every week and driving through the stones, every week I find somebody who's related I didn't know was related. Different marriages and different contacts, and you find new family all the time. I'm Grant Roy, and I've been here, our family's been here since the 1840s. Came over from a wee village, or a wee hamlet, I guess, called Logiaman, Scotland. The Roy family, there's William Roy and 2 sons and 2 daughters, and I'm descended from their son Andrew, who was the first one born here in Canada. Originally settled on the Australia concession and now live on Fertile Creek. My ancestors, they married girls from Fertile Creek, and then my grandfather married a girl from the Scotch concession, so everybody tried to stay within a concession when they went dating. They took up agriculture immediately. They worked in the slate mines in Scotland, so there was no future there except bad lungs. I think the idea of owning land was probably quite foreign to anybody coming from over there. That the Inclusion Act in the 1600s, all the common land became crown land, so you couldn't actually own land. You could tenant farm, and then the Highland clearances showed them that there was no future in tenant farming. So over here, for £100, you could own 100 arpents of land and have your own future. The homestead is still being farmed, but it's being farmed by a cousin. My family left there when my great-grandfather married a girl from Fertile Creek. He moved to Fertile Creek, and we've been there since. Technically Howick, not Riverfield. But my grandmother was from Riverfield. She actually grew up in the same house that Scott grew up in. And so we spent a lot of time here, very involved with the church and the curling club. My great-grandfather owned the general store, and we spent a lot of time there. And so we were in Riverfield quite often. I've been involved in the community a long time. I joined the board of directors for the cemetery several years ago. Then they asked if I was interested in cutting the grass here at the cemetery, and I thought it was a good job for my daughters, who are all in post-secondary education. So they needed some money, and now they've all graduated and gone on, so I inherited the job of maintaining the landscapes here at the cemetery. And I used to curl at the Howick Curling Club, but it closed, so we came and joined Riverfield, and they wanted someone to take care of the bar at Riverfield, so I volunteered for that job. So I'm here quite often, winter and summer. And since we're here in the cemetery, I can show you around and see some of the ancestors, and maybe there's some interesting stories we can find. So this is a cenotaph commemorating the World War I and World War II members of the community and congregation that went to war. It's standing on the spot where the original schoolhouse was, and the schoolhouse was moved to put the cenotaph up after the First War. At one time, there was a machine gun in front of the cenotaph, and unfortunately vandals stole it in the 1970s when scrap metal was a good price, and so we just haven't had one since. This is the World War II side. Nelson Logan, his mother was a Roy. She would be my great-grandfather's sister, Martha Logan. She was the organist at the church until she retired, and then my Aunt Olive took over. She lived to be 100 and something. They're all common names to this area: Allens, Carmichaels, Gundrys, McKells. This is in honor of the World War I veterans, those lost and served. I know most of the names. The only one I really know would be Albert Shanks. His father was president of the first curling club in Howick. Other than that, I don't really know the rest of them. This building across the street used to be the general store. When my great-grandfather sold the farm, he retired from farming, and he came down here, and he bought the general store, and he was the postmaster. There was a post office as well. They lived at the store, and he was a cock-shut machinery dealer, and he used to have all his machinery lined along the side of the cemetery here.
This is where my grandfather and grandmother are buried, James Wallace Templeton. And when they came on the boat in 1829, they brought a grandfather clock. And it's always stayed at the house of the oldest James Templeton in the family. So my grandfather had it at his house for a while. Presently it's at my cousin James Ernest Alexander Alec Templeton, who lives in the original stone house. And then once he's gone, my brother's name is James Wallace Templeton. the clock will go to him. And my brother's son, who is 23 or 24, his name is James Jared Templeton. So it's been in the family for 200 years. This is where my parents are buried. My father always said he wanted to be buried as close as possible to the Scotch concession because that's where he spent his whole life. So the Scotch concession is right there.
Oh yeah, that's around des Écossais. The names they gave the original concessions, there was, as you come down from Howick, there was the Irish concession, because there was a boatload of Irish came in and they all settled that road. And then there's the Scotch concession because it was all Scots came along here. It was called the English River because all the English settlers came down the Châteauguay and then came up the English River. So they started calling it the English River. And then on the other side of the river, there was the Tullagorm, and it was called the Tullagorm because the first guy that built the house, he had a party after he built his house and they kept playing the Tullagorm reel all night, so they called the road Tullagorm. It's now called the Rantois. And then Fertile Creek, there was a creek ran through the middle of it. It was very fertile land, so they called it Fertile Creek. It's actually Anderson's Creek that runs through it. It kept the name Fertile Creek. And then the Australia concession, because one old guy gave up farming on the other side of town and said he was going to Australia, but he moved to that road. So they started calling it the Australia concession. So James Davies had a property here on the Scotch concession. And in 1825, they say that the ice was just perfect. So he asked his brother-in-law, Miller, if he'd like to have a game of curling. But of course, they didn't have granites or anything. They just came from Scotland with basically a blanket box, and that was it. So they made some stones out of wood, cut a tree and just made some stones and had their first game. And that was basically the start of curling in 1825 here in Riverfield. And we've been curling here ever since.
And buried here is a good friend of ours, Morris Craig. He tragically passed away 4 years ago now in a farming accident. But Morris was the heartbeat of the Riverfield Curling Club for a long, long time, and we paid tribute to him with our Morris Craig commemorative wooden block bonds at the Curling Club this past February. So pretty much every concession along the English River had a curling club, even though there were only some of them 2, 3, 4 kilometers apart. So Howick was furthest down the river, then Fertile Creek, then English River was here. Aubrey was just up the river, and Lansdowne Curling Club was back to Scotch concession on a pond. So now we're at the Riverfield Curling Club, which was founded in 1825. In 1961, one of the more local curling clubs, Aubrey, had a fire, and it was at that time that the two clubs amalgamated. Originally it was English River Curling Club, and then when the two clubs amalgamated, it became Riverfield Curling Club. And here we have a number of artifacts from the club's history. And this is probably our centerpiece right here, the JD block. It was used back at the beginning by James Davies in the early games, made out of beechwood. And when we had our 150th anniversary 50 years ago, one of our members, his name was Roy Angel, to commemorate the history, he turned 2 sets of wooden curling blocks on a lathe. And every year since 1975, we've had a wooden block bonspiel. These are some of them right here. In 1975, 150th, we had a descendant of James Davies. His name is James Davies Lang. He threw out the JD block to open the wooden block bonspiel. And 50 years later, in 2025, his granddaughter, Judy Donna Lang, JD Lang, threw out the same block to start our 200th anniversary bonspiel. Riverfield Curling Club is probably the only club in the world that has an annual wooden block bonspiel. And it's quite different because the rocks are a bit lighter. They react a little differently than the granites, and it's more of a social thing, and anybody can play from 5 years old to 95 years old. This is one that Ross Craig, that's Morris's brother, this was one of the original blocks from Aubrey Curling Club. In 2025, we had our 200th anniversary, so we kicked off the season in October 2024 with what we called a homecoming. We had about a total of 140 people come for a Scottish luncheon, and then our main event was the Morris Craig commemorative wooden block bonspiel. We had 56 teams from all over. And then in the end of April, we closed the season with a bicentennial banquet with about 175 people, and we gave out some builders awards and some lifetime memberships. And this is the trophy that we give out each year for the wooden block bonspiel, and it was made by Wallace Craig, that was Morris's father, back 50 years ago. This is our membership board that was handcrafted by one of our members out of the old dance floor upstairs. A couple of years ago, there was only about 40 names on it. Now we have about 170. And I think the saying on the bottom pretty much says it all for us. For the love of the game and then the community it builds, and I think we've done that. So we're proud of that. I'm very proud of Riverfield because we are a tiny little hamlet. We have a cemetery that's very well maintained. We have a church that is being beautifully restored by an ancestral family. And we have a curling club that has had its tough times, but we just had our 200th anniversary and our membership is pretty much quadrupled in the last few years. The local elementary school in Howick, the enrollment was down to about 65 students and it was on the verge of closing. And here we are 15 years later and the enrollment has swelled to around 230 and it's busting at the seams. So as an Anglophone in Quebec, I'd say that's got to raise anybody's spirits.